Is the world doing enough to stop poisoning our planet? More rantings from a grumpy old man. COP27 is currently underway in Egypt. And if you don't know what COP27 stands for, it's the 27th Conference of the Parties to the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. Phew! So the UN General Secretary has been on fire with warnings to fossil fuel companies that using bogus net zero pledges to cover up massive increase in fossil fuel expansion is rank deception. Personally, I call it bullshit greenwashing. They're trying to get net zero commitments from nations, but it just isn't happening fast enough, in my opinion. And of course, some of the poorer nations will find it very difficult without any help. In fact, just today I saw that the United Kingdom government has agreed to help out Kenya's leadership on climate change to the tune of 3.6 billion British quid. Personally, I feel that these net zero commitments by 2050 are rubbish, and it needs to be net negative well before then in order to start undoing some of the damage that's already occurred. Before last year's Glasgow talks for COP26, experts were already warning that the world's last chance to limit global warming to 1.5 degrees centigrade this century was about to hit us. And just last week, a UN report found that if all nations met their climate goals this decade, that's the 2020s, the planet would still heat up to a catastrophic 2.5 degrees centigrade rise, and that would spell disaster. Basically, we're poisoning ourselves. How is it that a technologically advanced civilization like ours continues to choose to destroy itself? We've had decades to act, as the scientists have been warning us for almost 50 years that the dangers of greenhouse gas emissions are very high. Fossil fuel companies have been successfully countering this so that they can continue their business of getting more and more profitable. Fossil fuel hegemony. Here in Australia, the majority seem to want coal power phased out and no new fossil fuel projects. But it isn't happening. The Australia Institute's 2022 Climate of the Nation report reveals record numbers. Up to about 75% of Australians are very concerned about climate change, and 83% are concerned that it will result in higher frequency of droughts and floods. 79% support a phase out of coal-fired power stations, but for some strange reason, only 57% support following the International Energy Agency's pathway not to approve any new gas, coal or oil projects. The survey also found that the general public massively overestimates the contribution of the Petroleum Resource Rent Tax, or PRRT, which is how the government collects revenue from oil and gas exploration. It's actually only 0.3% of the budget for the 2021-22 financial year. Yet the public believed it contributed over 11%. Quite a big difference. The 7th annual global report on the countdown on health and climate change was published in the Lancet, which is a very well-known and respected medical magazine. And it was published just before COP27 began. Now, in this latest countdown report, it's the work of 99 experts from 51 institutions and is led by the University College London, which is actually my old stomping ground when I was at university. Some of the facts coming from this report are very, very concerning. It highlights a number of crises from food insecurity, infectious diseases, heat-related diseases, energy poverty, and deaths from air pollution. Dr. Marina Romanello, she's the executive director of the Lancet Countdown at University College London, said, "Despite the challenges, there is clear evidence that immediate action could still save the lives of millions with a rapid shift to clean energy. Accelerated climate action would deliver cascading benefits with more resilient health, food and energy systems." You reckon it's going to happen? This report also highlights dangerous health problems resulting from the inaction. The report claims that 69 out of 86 governments analysed are effectively subsidising fossil fuels for a net total $400 billion. And that was just in 2019. The subsidies in some of these countries actually exceeds their national health spending, and a few by quite a large portion. Professor Anthony Costello, co-chair of the Lancet Countdown, said, "We must change, otherwise our children face a future of accelerated climate change, threatening their very survival." I tend to agree with him. Besides these ridiculous subsidies going to the fossil fuel industry, they are also paying little to no tax. Now, the Corporate Report of Entity Tax Information, which is available from the Australian Taxation Office, some companies are paying no tax according to the very latest one, which I've just downloaded. Australia's largest coal and gas exporters paid no tax. None. And along with that, fossil fuel lobbyist News Corp also paid no tax at all in Australia. Other companies of interest include Glencore, with a massive coal mining portfolio, paid no tax. They had over $2.8 billion in taxable income, with $16 billion in revenue, and they paid nothing. BlueScope Steel has not paid any tax in Australia since 2017. Despite this year, they had around $600 million in taxable income. Woodside paid no tax on revenue of $6.7 billion, but they only had a taxable income of $157 million. Not very good company. Woodside also paid zero PRRT, Petroleum Resource and Rent Tax. Then we got Chevron, the multinational company. They had a revenue of $9.2 billion with a taxable income of only $113 million. And it paid, wait for it, $30. Yet $30 in tax. Just $30. What a bloody joke. And it also paid zero PRRT again. On the other hand, some of the big mining companies, BHP, they paid almost $9.9 billion in tax, and Rio Tinto, Fortescue, Roy Hill and others paying billions of dollars in tax each. Our four big banks here in Australia paid a total in excess of $8 billion in tax. I wonder why we continue to get royally effed up the rear end by these fossil fuel companies. Our government sits on its lazy rear end and does nothing. Look, we're only renting this world from our children and our grandchildren, so we need to look after it so they can have a healthy future. The fossil fuel economy, it's not only heating our climate, but it's killing us through the pollution. And it's costing in the region of $4 billion a year here in Australia alone in health problems. And this comes from the Accenture report, which also points out that Australia has a huge opportunity to build a resilient and flexible energy solution, which would deliver multiple benefits in efficiency, costs, and health outcomes. From this report, the numbers are quite impressive. Electricity prices could fall by 30 to 40%, largely because flexible loads allowing for more efficient use of the grid. Then there would be significant improvements in health outcomes, which could result in a $4 billion saving every year. There would also be more jobs, especially in our rural areas. What is not often talked about is the fact that the fossil fuel energy production is very inefficient, as it wastes so much energy in heat. But solar and wind generated power is extremely efficient with very little waste. Now, some state governments in Australia have said that coal-fired power stations will be phased out. Good. Queensland has said that all state-owned coal plants will be gone by 2035. Victoria is also looking at the same and has actually got a 95% renewables target. Western Australia, where I live, is closing the last state-owned coal plant by 2028. New South Wales hasn't announced any closures, but its renewables infrastructure plan assumes most will be closed in 10 years. That assumed is more government bullshit. The problem is that some coal plant owners are sticking to their close-by dates, with some of those as late as 2051. For instance, there's a privately owned 1.7 gigawatt plant in Queensland. And guess what? It's owned by skeptics of the renewable industry. But there are many other examples. On the upside, there is nearly 80 gigawatts of wind energy capacity in the pipeline and more than 40 gigawatts of large-scale solar, along with 35 gigawatts of battery storage. We're getting there, slowly. Now, in the automotive arena, Australia still does not have any form of emissions control legislation like that in Europe. If we did, then electric vehicles would become much more abundant here and prices would decrease. And then our emissions from vehicles would decrease, making our air healthier for all to breathe. Unfortunately, things are not going to happen fast enough. It's really up to governments to create the right conditions for emissions control, renewables in the form of wind and solar, amongst other options. But this just is not happening. Australia set itself a target of 43% emissions reduction by 2030. Pathetic. It's a very weak target. But despite that, they're not even on track to reach it. And that's as per the government's very own emissions projection figures. According to the Government of Australia, its own figures, as published in their quarterly update of Australia's National Greenhouse Gas Inventory in March 2022, electricity accounts for the largest portion of greenhouse gases, with transport coming in behind that. Now, if Australia was to rapidly build wind and solar farms, we could reduce a lot of those emissions. And then, add in the electric vehicles, we could reach a much higher target of emissions reduction, and sooner than 2030. One can see what the current situation is at the NEM Watch site, which is the National Electricity Market Watch site, and I'll put a link below. So this picture was taken late afternoon, and as you can see, Victoria, New South Wales and Queensland all have large coal-fired power generation, whilst at the other end of scale, Tasmania is basically 100% renewables. They've got good hydropower and solar and wind. South Australia still has some gas-powered stations, but it isn't doing too bad. But we desperately need to do better. Urgent action is needed, not only by Australia, but all other countries. If we can generate more power from renewables and get more electric vehicles in use, a lot of these problems can be solved. And it's not just that the greenhouse gas is a problem, but all the particulate matter, nitrous oxides and sulfur oxides that pollute the air and cause many diseases like asthma, bronchitis and so on, and many deaths. We all need to start doing something. using renewable energy and driving electric vehicles is going to help, but governments need to immediately stop subsidising the fossil fuel industry and tax them appropriately. They can then raise funds to build more solar and wind farms and some form of battery storage to smooth out the supply. Too sensible for governments, I'm sure. The Earth is in a very delicate balance. It's a complex interaction from different systems, and we all need to take some form of responsibility for correcting this anthropomorphic climate change before it's all too late and we've got to move to Mars. So that's the end of my rant. It really does pee me off somewhat that governments won't do more. But thanks very much for watching. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Don't forget, click the like and subscribe buttons, and I'll see you all very soon.